our first speaker, Dr. Adi Jaffe. There we go. I know who you are. You're Mrs. Jaffe. If you weren't excited, that would be a bad sign. So I think we're in good shape. Adi is the executive director of the Alternatives Addiction Treatment, who has a PhD from UCLA, and he's going to talk to us about changing the labels that tear us apart. Let's give him a warm welcome, Dr. Adi Jaffe.
I heard my wife from all the way back there. That was nice. Thank you so much, Jason. Thanks for having me, and thanks for mindbodygreen for having this. And I just want to tell Ritz-Carlton I'll take that residence now. They offered a free one for the rest of our lives, so I'm sure Sophie's happy about that. But seriously, it's an honor to be here, and thank you all for showing up. I'm going to start us out with a story, and I want to tell you about one of my clients. He showed up to my office when he was only 25 years old, but he'd already been arrested for the 4th time, and this time was really serious. He'd had brushes with the law before, but it wasn't that big of a deal. The way he got to me, the story that I heard, was he'd been using drugs since the age of 14, had really gotten in trouble. And his story was a little different, though. It started way before that. He talked about his love of shoplifting. He would steal anything, this kid. He'd steal food, toys. If you got a gift from him, it was probably stolen. He was essentially a kleptomaniac, but nobody ever paid attention. He never got caught until at the age of 19, he ended up having to spend a night in jail for stealing condoms. He was trying to be safe, though, so that's nice. But, that was kind of how I got to know him, was after that event. That bumping with the law for a lot of people would strain them out. It would get them to the point where they, start living on the straight and narrow, but for him, it started a downward spiral. That meant more drug use, and then he kind of got into drug dealing, and when I say kind of, he started with weed, but that added cocaine and MDMA, and eventually meth, and kind of like a pharmaceutical version of a 7-Eleven. He was born to a nice upper middle class family, professional family, but by the time I saw him, he was just a 128-pound meth addict with big black circles under his eyes. I wouldn't exactly say he was defeated when we started working together, but I can tell you there's definitely this whiff of, something's wrong, this is heading the wrong way, just enveloping him everywhere he was. In reality, I was just a stop for this kid. I was a way station. He was trying to figure out what to do about 13 felony counts and looking at decades in prison. When they caught him, he had a gun on him, and in case you guys don't know, that makes everything worse, so don't do it. But the way he told it was he'd been held up twice at gunpoint, hogtied, and he just needed some protection. So that was his answer, but what he got kind of instead was he became his own weird version of Scarface. But it wasn't glamorous. There was nothing cool about it, and he kept trying to figure out how to get out, but he just couldn't do it. He was seeing me to stop the meth use, the drugs, the using, the dealing, all of that, the lifestyle. He was hoping that by being able to get that done, he'd get a semblance of a life out of the mess that he created out of it. He had barely any contact with any family member. The only people he really hung out with were other drug dealers, strippers, and these hangers-on that thought they liked him because he had money and dope, and it's not that hard at that point. He told me he used to have fun when it first started, but by the time we got together, it was this tedious, endless cycle that was still scary and kind of like a movie he was living through. I helped this kid, 25 years old, but this kid kicked the meth, but kicking drug dealing was actually a lot harder. We really had to face a lot of fears that he had, right? He was really afraid of any normal version of life. He was afraid of losing all that money and being broke. He was afraid of losing his power, and he was afraid of failing at whatever it was that he tried next. As we worked together, the fears receded to the background, but there was nothing there. It was just a dark, black background of a life. He ended up having to fight the case in court for about a year or two, and he only got a year in jail at the end. Proof once again that expensive lawyers are really worth it, but he was getting another chance at life. By the time he got out of that year in jail, he had almost 2 years without meth use and without drugs, and he got an even bigger gift, which I'm sure a lot of people here can appreciate, a real relationship with his family. His mom, his sister, his dad. And that kid that walked into my office, that self-absorbed egomaniac with, a gun, $10,000 in cash, and enough drugs to start a really great Beverly Hills mansion party, He just became a normal person. At Alternatives, as Jason mentioned, we treat a lot of these kind of kids. And I've heard a lot of these stories, but there's something special about this one. There's something unique about this kid and his story, and I'm more connected to him, and I'm more proud of his success. And that's probably, at least to some extent, because the guy in the story is actually me. Normally when I drop that line, I have to give people just a couple of seconds, because they didn't expect me to be a meth-addicted, drug-dealing ex-con. And that's obviously done on purpose, right? Those labels are exactly the reason why I waited 5 minutes to introduce my real self to you. Because there's something special that happens when we apply labels to a human being. I mean, before we go any further, I want you guys to think about this. What are some labels, what are some names, what are some attributes other people have attributed to you in your life? Just think of a couple. Are any of the ones you're thinking about ones you got stuck with but you hate? You see, labels have real meaning in life. They help us do a lot of things. For instance, a lot of you got here in metal boxes with weird little rubber circles attached to them, like that. No? Did you get here in one of those? Okay, no, we don't. That's not what you showed up. You showed up in cars, right? Let's just call them cars. The labels make communication easier. Right? It'd be weird if I had to describe things to you every single time. Research has shown us over and over that as humans, we do better and we like it when we can fit things into nice, neat categories. So, we've got cars and trucks, chairs and tables, young and old, hot or not, Democrat and Republican, white and black, bad and good. I'm pretty sure that you see how as soon as we start trying to apply these labels to people, we start having trouble pretty quickly. Let's just start with that young-old example. I think that's a pretty good place. I'm pretty sure that among the couple of hundred people we have here right now, we could have a really lively debate about where exactly that line should be drawn. But we use the words all the time, young and old. I've changed my mind about where that line is at least a dozen times. And why are you laughing? And my mom tells the story of when I was 5 years old, I came home from playing with all my friends, and somebody in the street had asked me to give her a message. I grew up in a town in Tel Aviv, a small neighborhood. And so she asked me who gave me the message. And I didn't really know the person's name, and she kept badgering me and asking me questions about who this was. So at some point, I just kind of got mad, and I blurted out, just some old woman, I don't know. My mom did a little research, and she found out that this old woman was a 31-year-old friend of hers. I just turned 40 last month. And it scares me to think what exactly my 5-year-old self would think of me now. But it happens, right? We change our opinion about labels all the time. The point I want to drive home is these labels have real meaning. They have power. When you apply a label to somebody, a whole bunch of things happen to you. You start attributing how they might act, how much money they might have, what their beliefs might be, who their friends might be, and how likely you are to want to be part of that friend group. You see, the thing is, labels are supposed to be based on stereotypes and information you've gleaned throughout life, but in reality, they're just these weird, approximate, unrefined shortcuts. That's the point. They sound like they give us consistency, like that thing with the cars, but in reality, they're crude. So, if a friend of mine and I are driving down the street and we see a young black man driving in a really fancy car, his proclivity to wonder out loud whether the kid stole the car or not tells me a lot more about the guy sitting next to me than the guy sitting in the car. And if that's where we stopped, if that's as far as it went, we'd actually be okay. Because each one of us would be sitting alone, trying to figure out how to resolve our prejudices, how to become better people, or just not really caring and just kind of living our life. But that's not all it does. You see, in reality, when we have lower expectations of other people, we actually hurt the options that they have to prove us wrong. And when our opinions become wholesale and part of the public discourse, we can hurt whole groups of people. And when those people try to prove us wrong, when they try to perform and show us, They can suffer with things like depression, anxiety, chronic stress, hypertension, etc. So yeah, judging others as inferior can actually weaken them and make them sick. And I think that's why it plays into what we're talking about here today. Now, you don't have to believe me, but I don't know if you noticed or not, Jason called me doctor before he introduced me. So I think hopefully that buys me a little bit of credibility. But I brought a bunch of research to show you guys proof. And the proof is going to be in how subtle and yet powerful this stuff is. So let's start with something simple. When researchers give black and white students intelligence tests, black students consistently underperform. And that's probably not a big surprise. It might be sad, but it's not a big surprise to anybody sitting in this room. How many people have heard about the racial achievement gap in this country? Okay, I think most of us have heard something about it at some point, right? The thing you didn't realize is when the exact same questions we're giving to those students, but not labeled as an intelligence test, just as part of a manipulation and experiment, the difference disappears. But it shows right back up if you make those students check a box showing their racial category before filling out the questions. And when you take students like this and you put front and center the stereotypes, the low expectations you have of them, their blood pressure goes up as well. And let's take it further. What if I told you that your golf game can be affected just by the way I present it to you? Researchers in Princeton recruited students who came into a lab and presented with a golf-based task. And all they were told was the researchers specifically planned this, specifically made this game to test people's natural athletic ability. And what happened is black students actually completed the task using, on average, 5 strokes less than white students. If anybody here plays golf, you know that 5 strokes can make the difference between a really good day and a really bad day. But if the researchers used a different terminology and told the group that instead of natural athletic ability, this was testing athletic intelligence, the difference flipped and the white students did better. Same exact task. And how many people have heard of the Stanford prison experiment? Okay. In the Stanford prison experiment, the researchers wanted to see what it was that caused uprisings and violence in prisons. They thought that by setting up this study, they were going to find environmental influences or maybe personality variables that predicted violence, and they would be able to help out prisoners and prisons and the criminal justice system. You know what they found instead? What they found is that by simply giving some of the students who participated guard uniforms and the rest prisoner uniforms, they created a situation so insane that they actually had to stop the experiment in 6 days. You want to know why? Because the guards were psychologically abusing the prisoners. And the prisoners were going crazy. This is an actual picture from the documentary, from the study. And this was after 6 days. These were specifically students that were picked because they didn't have violence problems, they didn't have criminal histories, and they didn't have any psychological problems that could be diagnosed. Even the research leader, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, lost it when he gave himself the title of the prison sort of superintendent. He ended up working along with the guards to foil an escape attempt by the prisoners, you know, his students. All this in 6 days, less than a week. Just imagine for a second what it does to somebody to live under expectations like this for a lifetime. Or how about generations? Experimenter bias, confirmation bias, the Pygmalion effect, stereotype threat, the Lucifer effect. These things have a lot of different names in the literature, but the message is always the same. Our expectations, our beliefs about other people actually change the way they behave in real, meaningful ways, whether we ever tell them or not. When you consider these studies and you kind of look at your life, you've got to start thinking about what are the behaviors that you don't really like in other people, and your opinions of them have actually the opposite direction. Maybe your negative opinions of other people are actually the cause of the behavior you don't like, not the result of it. I mean, think about it. I just showed you that by calling you dumb, good at sports, or a guard, I can change how you behave. How many times have you called somebody stupid or smart? Friendly or anxious? And how are you actually changing the way they behave by describing them that way? Are you just ignoring beliefs that go counter to what you already think? Are you just completely missing the point? I think the research shows us that there's a good chance that the answer is yes. In this society, we talk so much about wanting to change ourselves, change the way we see ourselves, and making ourselves do better. Is it any wonder to anybody, does anybody not relate to the fact that if you surround yourself with people who believe in you, people who see the best in what you bring to the world, you do better? We all know this, right? Well, if that's true when you relate it to yourself, it's time for you to start taking responsibility for other people. You're already impacting their behavior. It's happening right now. You just have to own it. I want to go back to the beginning of our little adventure, and when you first saw me standing out here, before you knew I was a low-life, drug addict, your opinion of me was different. Maybe just a little bit, but it was different. Something changed as soon as you found that out. I've been part of a lot of those conversations because people don't expect it typically when they see me now in life. And when they find out, I get those glances. Sometimes it's admiration, sometimes it's fear. Most of the time it's just kind of being weirded out, honestly. When I was a grad student, there was this girl I was flirting with, and I was kind of hoping to date her. And we were having coffee on campus one day, and she got that talk, right? Hey, I just want to let you know that this is part of my past. Within 1 hour, she stopped responding to texts and phone calls. 1 hour. I ended up emailing her and saying the following. I said something like, look, I totally get it if you don't want to date me after what I just told you, but I just want to let you know that I'm the exact same person I was 5 minutes before I told you the story. When she heard that, she got brave, and she reached back out. But I can guarantee that the dating was completely off the table. That was not coming back. And now I actually consider myself really lucky, because if that didn't work out that way, I wouldn't have been able to meet my beautiful wife, Sophie, who cheered me on before this started. But I can tell you, it felt shitty in the moment to have to explain who you are to another human being. I hadn't done anything else wrong. It had been 12 years earlier, but it was still there. We've come to a place where doctors are these trustworthy, intelligent, altruistic, shining stars of society that have your best interest at heart. And drug addicts are low-life scum that will cheat, steal, lie to get anything from you. But the question is, what do you do with people like me? What do you do with the millions like me who are actually a contradiction of those expectations? How do you resolve that conflict? What do you do with it? And if you take it one little step farther, it gets much worse. Because we live in a world that is so comfortable with these little bite-sized little pieces of knowledge that we've come to a place where a Muslim is essentially a terrorist. A Jew is somebody who's cheap, and somebody who's black is a less capable criminal. But with good athletic ability, so they've got that positive going for them. That's where we live right now. And that's before anybody opens their mouth, before you get to learn anything about them. Just look around. Our polarization is the result of our over-reliance on these labels. The only way out is to just take back the power. There is no ultimate truth to a label. There's absolutely no way to describe any human being with a single word, ever. We've got to stop. We're talking about wanting to help ourselves and get better people. Here's my beginning hint for this 2-day adventure on self-help. Each one of you holds on to labels that keep you down, and you accept them, and you just take it for granted. And other people around you, they do the exact same thing to you, and they weaken you. If you want to break the chain, if you want to get the key to the cell and get out, you've got to start getting comfortable with just how powerful these labels are and acknowledge it. Take a look at these labels, these things you apply to yourself, these stories, and figure out which elements of them apply to you and to all the people around you. Keep those, throw the rest away. If you think about it, these studies actually show us something really, really cool too. That by simply changing the meaning of these labels in a positive way, you get to improve your life. You get to improve the life of yourself and everybody else around you. That's what makes the work that we do at Alternative so cool, right? What we've been able to do is we've changed the way people look at addiction. We've given them a way forward that gets rid of the shame and the stigma and the expectations of what being a drug addict really means. I've sat in rooms with heroin addicts, crack addicts, long-term alcoholics who've either not gone to treatment or have been through treatment 8, 9, 10, 20 times. You would be amazed how much somebody's behavior changes when you just drop the low expectations. So take back that power. Figure out for yourself, rewrite the meaning of what it is to be bipolar or have ADHD, what it means to be skinny, fat, black, white, Jewish, Muslim, drug addict, alcoholic. I mean, sure, look, we all have weak spots, we all have idiosyncrasies, we all have strengths. That's not a problem, that's what makes us human. That's what's so great about the human experience. We don't need to get rid of that. You get to decide that your heightened emotional sensitivity is okay, as long as you manage it in a way that's appropriate to you. And for some of you, that might mean medication. For other people, it might mean therapy, biofeedback, yoga, whatever works. That as long as you're comfortable with your weight, your color, your faith, your sexual orientation, nobody gets to tell you you're not okay. First of all, because you are. That's the power we all get. You get to do that. That is your destiny. Thank you.